All right, here we go. Texans finish off an historic draft day weekend where they pulled off 8 trades, and obviously a whole lot of excitement. Some criticism over some of Caserio's trades, and there's been plenty of discussion about that. Let me plug in here before I get too far along. But I am going to enhance the audio on some of these questions. I've tried to make them audible because I know a lot of you guys get really frustrated with that with the Texans. But also, I will read from the transcripts in places where I couldn't increase the audio without it getting unlistenable, basically. All right, let's start it off. Nick started with his opening comments on Saturday afternoon after the draft.
Kind of culminating with the selections here today. Had the 2 picks there in the 4th round at the top. And then we going in had a little bit of a gap with the 3, 6, and the 1 or 2 7s, whatever it was. So then really we made the trades before the draft even started.
So he's talking about at the beginning of the 4th round, they get a lot of calls, and these trades have been executed before the draft started.
Let's say typically what happens there at the top of the 4th round, you usually get calls. So teams are looking to move up, teams are looking to trade up. Our thought process was we probably were going to pick at one spot and then move back to try to accumulate another pick there in the middle. So the trade with Vegas kind of afforded us the opportunity to do that, move down to 109, picked up the 5th, and it was really kind of repositioning some of the picks. And then with the Philly situation or the Philly pick, I mean, it was a pick for next year. I mean, Philly's a good team, so, I mean, it's a 3rd, but, it's probably going to be middle to the bottom, so it's called a 4th. But nonetheless, acquiring a future pick like we thought it made sense. So we had X number of players there kind of at the top. We figured we'd get one of them. So we moved back, picked Dylan.
And yeah, Nick's talked about this a lot before, that they've got bands of players, and when they trade, it seems like when they trade back especially, they feel like, okay, we're trading back into a spot where we feel comfortable, so whoever's still available when we get there, will like that guy. It doesn't make a guy necessarily feel like the most special guy in the world, like Dylan Horton. It's like, okay, I was the last. It's basically like being like you're the girl that's there at 2 a.m.
Horton, defensive end there from TCU, so good player. Just kind of played a couple different defensive systems. Probably best suited at defensive end, so probably be a defensive end in our front. Has good size, good length, productive season. Had a pretty good Senior Bowl week. So again, their front, the way they play, they're kind of 3-3-5. So he's kind of played multiplicity of front, kind of in 4-eye, some inside. Really fits more on the edge of the defense, so kind of fits the profile of what we're trying to do here on a defensive end spot.
So for those of you who didn't see my video breaking down Dylan Horton started off as a 200-pound safety his senior year in high school, ended up gaining like 75 pounds as he made a transition from outside linebacker at SMU to eventually outside linebacker at TCU to eventually last year really being a full-time defensive end for the first time. So he's had to learn how to play defensive end, and they had him doing that at TCU. I think the way the Texans want to use both Will Anderson and Dylan Horton, like they want them to be guys that just play old school defensive end, put your hand in the dirt and get after it, which is fun.
So that was the pick at 10, whatever we make it, 109, whatever it was. And then kind of we're positioned there 174, and then just kind of scooted up a little bit there. Similar type of trade with, I want to say it was the Rams, right? Yeah. So it was repositioning.
The other thing too is I'm always amazed. Kubiak was like this when he would talk about some of the offensive stats, in that you realize, okay, like the coaches are so wrapped up in the actual mechanics of things that they don't care that much about the stats when they're actually getting stuff done. And the GMs too, like Nick, like I don't think, even when you criticize Nick for any of his moves, or if anybody does, like nobody's under any illusion that he's not very aware of everything that's going. But when it comes to trying to recall the exact details in these moments, I think they're looking at the trade value chart and they're figuring things out. But yeah, with that pick, the Rams got our Mr. Irrelevant.
Henry's a player. I mean, wherever he's played, he's been productive. So whether it was at Tennessee, whether it was at Alabama, I mean, captain, leader, ran a defense, signal caller, highly productive, instinctive. So
he's talking about To'o Toho here, who, just a quick lesson, maybe, unless I get it wrong. When it comes to Polynesian names, it generally is like is each vowel is pronounced separately. So like if there's an o, it's not oo, it's o. So it's to-o, to-o-o, to-o, to-o, to-o. There we go. To-o, to-o.
There's a lot of good qualities. Should have a role in the kicking game. So depth at linebacker, depth in a kicking game, good makeup. I mean, high-level makeup. I'd say kind of elite makeup.
Elite.
Top of the line makeup. So I'd say him and Anderson, I don't want to say essentially ran a defense down there, but they pretty much ran a defense down there. So so that was that. And then right.
Another thing about Polynesian cultures that I learned the hard way was that the rivalry between islands and nations is not always like a very like playful and jovial one. Because I made a joke to Junior Ioane once, something about basically about one of the other islands, and I was just like saying like I feel like it was a rivalry like between colleges or something. And Junior was like, "Hey Seth, I just want to say it's a good thing that you and I are close because don't ever say that again." And I was like, "Okay, cool, man."
So
I'm not gonna piss off any of my Samoan friends.
91, so it's kind of 2 for 1 there. So really, at that point, you're probably looking at the same players. So it was kind
All right, show off, Rotten Oxford. I don't know what a glottal stop is. Why do you think I would know what a glottal stop is? Glottal stop.
all right, maybe we can pick up an extra pick or two and just kind of reposition it. And then as we were going, started looking up there. Let's say Hutchinson was kind of a player that kind of stood out to us here a little bit. So here's a guy, Blinn, Iowa State. Highly productive. Let me go back and look at his production. I would say it was, he had 100 catches last year or the year before, whatever it was. Good size, good toughness, really good with the ball in his hands, great practice player. Let's say this is a classic example of a guy, his workout didn't go great, but he's a good football player, so he kind of falls into that bucket. So it's a player that the offensive staff thought highly of. So as we were just repositioning at that point, we were just trying to see who are players that you have maybe decent grades on, that you have some affinity for. So, that's why we went ahead and made the pick with Hutch. And then the last pick there.
Hutchinson, by the way, started off, he had mentioned Blinn College there. Blinn, home of many famous people, Johnny Manziel. And then he transferred to Iowa State. He was 3-time first team All Big 12, 107 catches as an All-American senior.
I think it was the first 7th round pick we've made in 3 years, so may everybody stick around for that one. But Brandon Hill, so safety out of Pitt, I would say fast, tough, explosive, urgent, 5'10", 195, ran 4.4. Kind of hell on wheels. The guy's got a really good playing style. So I would say when you talk about, explosive, competitive, tough, the things that we want to emphasize, the things that DeMeco wants to emphasize on defense, he sort of fits the profile. Probably a little bit better closer to the line of scrimmage, but, we'll get him here and kind of see maybe where he fits in some other spots. So,
and that's interesting, too, because it's, they love having versatility. I think both Jimmy Ward and, gosh, why am I blanking on, jeez. Embarrassing. Jalen Petrie, Baylor. Those guys both very versatile. So there's plenty of room for the 7th round safety to figure out how he's going to be used. If he needs to be used closer to the line of scrimmage, it's not necessarily the chief concern right now.
He went into the weekend with 12, ended up picking 9, lost a pick for next year or 2, lost 2 picks, picked up an extra pick. So and really the 6th next year is really a 7th this year. So it's not. Again, I think everybody loses their minds when you're giving up a lot to move up and get a player. We're talking about a 7th round pick, so I don't think anybody should read into much of that. So again, if somebody wants to go look at the trade chart, be my guest. So
be my guest. That's his Clint Eastwood moment there. Hold on a second. That should be I'm going to write that down. 943. Be my guest. That's his Arnold Schwarzenegger / Clint. He's like a German Clint Eastwood. Austrian, excuse me. Sorry, Arnold.
So work through undrafted free agent process here this evening. So we'll probably end up with about 85, 86 players-ish. Leave a few spots open, so could be some undrafted players or tryout types, could be some free agents out there in the league that we had. So, I mean, we just kind of flipped the page. It's not like everybody's going to go on vacation here now. So, we got through the draft process. Hopefully it was a productive weekend. I mean, really can't say enough about the effort of everybody involved, from the coaching staff to the scouting staff. The constant communication, the constant dialogue, the constant what-if scenarios, and always just trying to be prepared for what the next step is, what the next move is, and then lose a player, go to the next player. Okay, what are the contingency plans in place? So just can't say enough about the overall group and the overall functionality in the draft room. So day 3 gets moving, I would say, a little bit quicker because you have less time. You go from 7 minutes, you go to 5 minutes, then you go to 4 minutes in the 7th round. So, but appreciative of everybody's effort, appreciative of the time and the commitment, and just the communication. So it's a team effort. It's about the Houston Texans getting better as a team. That's what the emphasis has been from the get-go, and we'll continue to do that. So rookie minicamp will be not the next weekend, but the following weekend. So it'll be the first opportunity for the players to get here. And then I
got a question for you guys too about this before McClain gets in his first question. What do you guys do on, like, especially days 2 and 3 of the draft to keep track of what's going on? Because I get frazzled, especially on day 3, because it's just try to keep track of the trades, what's coming in. When you watch on the broadcast, even, it's not always clear. Like when we do the broadcast I do the Friday night broadcast, and Robert Hensley is sitting there like 5 minutes ahead of the broadcast sometimes, which I know isn't that big a deal, except he's doing it just off his Twitter feed. And I can't do that. I go chasing squirrels too much.
Our current players will continue phase 2 of the offseason program here starting Monday. So we just keep moving forward. So, I mean, there's still a lot of work for us to do, but excited about the weekend, excited about adding some quality players to the team that we think can help us, and kind of go from there. So
I'm so jealous of you people who can stay focused while on Twitter. You have no idea what it's like being like one of us.
Questions?
You and DeMeco are always talking about character. You drafted a bunch of captains. Is that important?
Okay, so I'm assuming you guys could hear that one, but just in case, McClain says you always say you draft on character. You drafted a bunch of captains. Is that important?
I think it speaks to who they are and what their teammates think of them. So it's not the reason you draft them, John, but obviously they're put in that position for a reason. And I would say captainship, as we know, it's different wherever you go. So maybe being a captain sometimes turns into a popularity contest, but when you're a captain, it's about leadership, and leadership is about action. So, but it speaks to, I would say, what their teammates think of them, what the coaches think of them, and just their overall presence and commitment. Now, they're not going to be captains when they walk in our building, but they're good teammates. They have the right mindset. They put the team first. So I wouldn't say that that's a sole criteria that we base the pick off of, but it's a part of the evaluation, just like a number of other factors are.
As far as the captain stuff goes, yeah, it is tempting to think of like a team full of guys who are former captains would probably be a pretty cool team, and it would be. But I think it's like everything else. So you got to have at least a few jackasses. And I think the more captains you have, the more you can absorb some of those jackasses. Like with Jalen Carter, for instance, Jalen Carter goes off to a really good situation where they've got a bunch of old, salty veterans. Not to mention Kobe Dean, right? The linebacker from Georgia that was already up there from the year before. Jordan Davis doesn't necessarily... he's still young. So, but like Jalen Carter is going to have a lot of positive influences around him. So I think that's the thinking is right now in these infant stages, get as many team captains on here as possible. And then when it comes time to stretch a little bit and you bring a guy in, that guy is going to rise up to meet the temperature in the room instead of him being one of the guys that pulls everybody else down. And there are like, okay, I'll say one more thing about that. I remember talking to Kyle Brady, who was a teammate of mine early in my career, but he was with the Patriots the year after Deflategate, the year after Spygate. And I asked him about what it was like in that team and like how did they keep focus on it. And he said just that there was so much veteran leadership on that team, which obviously Caserio was involved in, that it was never even a concern. Like it never would be. And Brady's like a really smart guy. And had been on a few different teams. So he noticed the difference in just it makes a difference. Like you can absorb a lot more drama when you've got guys in the room that are genuine adults.
All these outside pundits grade everyone's draft classes, and I wondered, as someone in charge of this team, how would you grade your draft class, and were you able to accomplish all the things you set out to do this weekend?
I/TBD, incomplete / to be determined. I mean, that's the reality of it. So, I mean, it'll be, 50,000, draft grades here, tonight, tomorrow, what we did, what we didn't do. I mean, based on.
And I'm going to do podcasts on them.
What? I mean, nice players haven't done anything. So.
Tell me if you have an appetite for that, or if that's just the lowest common denominator, doing a review of like the worst and best draft grades of the Texans. I feel like doing a draft grade myself is beneath me, but I'll totally do that Jim Rome thing where I talk about it, how it's beneath me, to the point where I'm actually talking about it, even though I claim that I'm not talking about it.
We just try to add players
Not beneath me, but beneath you. You guys are a cerebral bunch
that we think can help our football team in some capacity. Now that they're here, they'll determine what their role is. So we can't get too caught up in that. I'm certainly not. I mean, honestly, I don't really care what the grades say because it doesn't really affect anything that we do.
As far as the grades too, like I always hear people say, or I'll always see some people say, well, I wish they'd go back and do a grade 3 years later, or grade the graders. They do all that. That's what July is for. There's nothing going on. If you ever found yourself saying, I wish they'd go back and grade the grades, listen to us in July when we'll go back and bash the Pete Priscos, who's a friend of mine, and others who do these post-draft grades. Generally, it's figured like a 3-year, you want 3 years. After 3 years, you can grade a draft and see how everything turned out. So the Dwayne Browns and the Kareem Jacksons can kind of emerge if they're slow starters.
That's why I wondered what you thought, and if you were able to do all the things you wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think the goal every year and each step of the way is just add players that we think can have an opportunity to help us. So through that lens, I would say hopefully we've done that. So we'll find out more when they actually are here and then when they actually kind of get started in our program.
Yeah, and that's the other part that's always fun is I think the scouts themselves and the coaches, they've got their favorites or they got guys that they really liked, but you really don't know until they show up. And it's amazing. It's amazing, like to watch the guys from the first day of their rookie camp till the end of that year. That might be the most improvement you ever make as a football player. I always felt like the most improvement you ever make in one day is from the day of your first NFL game to the end of that NFL game. Like it's a completely different world. And depending on, I mean, if you're going against actual NFL players, if you're going against another backup or something who's a rookie, then it's different. But still, it's a big jump.
How does your draft strategy change going forward when you don't have as many picks like you did this year with 8 trades? I mean, does it change at all, or do you kind of go into different ways of trying to acquire more?
Let me know if you guys can hear these questions. All right. It says I can hear them fine in my ear. I upped them as much as I could.
As far as you're saying for
going forward with like looking at next year and other stocks going forward. I mean, next year you have fewer picks. I'm just curious if the strategy changes at all than where we all were this year.
Say fewer picks right now, but there's a lot that can happen between now and next year. So trade a player, acquire an asset, get draft capital. So we're sitting and saying static, like nothing's going to change between now and April next year. Okay, I'd say it's highly unlikely. So it doesn't change anything. So we'll just look at our team, evaluate our team, look at opportunities. If there's an opportunity to add, great. What's the cost? If there's an opportunity to acquire a trade, or if the team is interested in a player, what's the cost associated with that? So I'd say there's a good chance, like whatever picks we have now, whatever the number is on paper, that's probably going to be a different number by the time we draft next April or whatever it is.
They don't need enough to trade up for Caleb Williams, unless it's really bad this year.
The Jacksonville Jaguars already had trouble with the rest of the division in this draft, drafting a quarterback that they see could be their franchise. Now, how much does that, affect or?
Okay, I'm guessing you can't hear that. The Jets and the Jaguars, they already had quarterbacks, but the rest of the division in this draft drafted a quarterback they think can lead. Oh, they drafted a quarterback they think can lead their franchise. How much does that affect how you guys approach in terms of building a roster,
Yeah, affect how you guys approach in terms of building a roster, knowing that other teams in the division are also.
knowing that other teams in the division are also acquiring quarterbacks to go forward?
Yeah, I mean, we're not really worried about what anybody else is doing. So we're focused on our team, and we just try to add players to our team that we think can help us in some capacity. So, I mean, not to oversimplify it, but I mean, that's the answer.
Yeah, I think like I don't know if with that question they were thinking about maybe back when Peyton Manning was in the division, and I think it was Bob McNair that said, "Hey, you got Peyton Manning in the division, you better go get somebody that can get after Peyton Manning." When they drafted Mario Williams, especially for rookie quarterbacks or Trevor Lawrence or anybody, like, you're going to see good quarterbacks all the time. Like even if that great guy is in your division or not, I don't think Bob McNair, when he said that, was saying it really as the driving force behind getting a pass rusher. It was just, Bob actually had a way with words when it came to just little quips and stuff like that. So I think that's all it was.
Jonathan there.
Do you have any particular positions that are going to want to target as free agents or maybe even in free agency?
All right. So do you have any particular position on target or acquiring players in free agency?
No, I mean, same thought process. You might have room, certain positions, you may have more room than others. So probably take, I don't know, let's call it 15 offensive linemen to training camp. So I think we ended up with 10 or 11, after Patterson. Actually, I skipped over him, so in the discussion, but I think we ended up with 11 offensive linemen, so we'll probably sign a few after the draft, maybe leave a few spots available. Most positions is kind of one or two players here or there, so, and then if you add beyond that, then, it comes at the expense of another player. So, actually, while we're at Patterson, so I would say.
So Patterson, the interior offensive lineman from the 6th round.
A lot of experience, Senior Bowl, he's played center, he's played guard, position versatility, good makeup. Pendergast will probably get excited because we
Sean Pendergast, my co-host on Sports Radio 610, 6 to 10 a.m. in the mornings on weekdays.
drafted somebody from Notre Dame, so.
He went to Notre Dame.
But I would say he and Juice are kind of similar, but they're kind of different, right? So it kind of gives us a little bit of depth and maybe some versatility inside.
I think that both those guys, you talk about drafting guys who are captains. I think with center and guard, it's not always about the measurables, and really center in particular. I mean, obviously, guys who are super athletic and just flash and go in the first round, like Travis Frederick or whatever, like those guys stand apart. But if I think the two guys that I played against from Kubshanistani systems that were probably the best, Chris Myers and Tom Nalen. And I played against Chris Myers like in practice one year, but he would go on to be really good. Those are the guys I have good experience with. Tom Nalen from the Broncos was maybe a 5th round pick. He may have been an undrafted rookie free agent. I'm not sure. Neither of those guys were incredible athletically, but especially Tom Nalen, but they were just really scrappy, really smart, and smart in terms of how to use their body, weight, leverage, all that stuff, how to feed guys to the guards. And it's a little bit more nuanced than judging those guys, because I'll be honest with you, I wasn't blown away with them. So I'm going to be interested to watch and see exactly what the Texans saw in them.
I mean, he's done both. I don't know what.
That was. Do you see him as a guard or a center? Talking about Patterson.
Where
He's done both.
Where he's best at relative to whoever the other players are, like that's where he'll play. So
Nick's had enough today. I like a little bit more. He's not like short-tempered or anything. He's a little short.
like we talked about last night, when you have interior players on your team, some are guard only, some can play 3 positions, some are center only. So I would say in the case of Scruggs, center to guard, can potentially play all 3. Patterson has played all 3. He started at center, I want to say in 21 or whatever year it was, and then he started at guard. So he's done both. So essentially it says that he could play all 3 positions. So how does he fare relative to somebody else inside? Because then again, when you're taking 7, 8 offensive linemen to the game, the ability to do multiple is going to enhance that player's overall value.
I think sometimes we should preface these stories about versatility to Nick and say, listen, Nick, we've been burned before. We had a rough go of it with Bill O'Brien and him trying to make offensive lineman be versatile, because he took Xavier Hutchinson and had him play right tackle, right guard, left guard, center at one point. I think that did Suafilo play every position except left tackle for the Texans. So that's versatility run amok. We don't need that much, and that's not what Nick wants for interior offensive linemen, especially. Ideally, yeah, you have a center who can also play guard.
Nick, when you look at the way Horton is, his evolution from playing other positions where he's further away from the ball, what do you think that helps him just to sort of see the field? Your TCU defensive end that you drafted.
Oh, Horton.
Oh, sorry, guys. I keep forgetting you can't hear that. When you look at Dylan Horton, talk about his evolution from playing other positions where he's further away from the ball and his evolution from standing up to now. So, fourth round pick, Dylan Horton, who started off as an outside linebacker, then played a different version of an outside linebacker when he went from SMU to TCU. And then when Patterson left, he played really defensive end for the first time this last year and really took to it. So he's a guy who's really still coming into his own, both in terms of body weight. He added over 50 pounds from his freshman year to now, and just playing with his hand in the dirt, being a defensive lineman.
Kind of his evolution from standing up to now being your point for a few years. Do you think that helps the overall understanding?
Maybe more from a spatial awareness more than anything else. But when you're off the ball, there's certain things that you're required to do. Look, I would say like him dropping into coverage isn't necessarily like a strength of his. Now, it's something that he's done. Does that help him relative to what we're going to ask him to do and teach him? Probably not. I'd say with a lot of players, not just Dylan, but what we're going to ask them to do may be a little bit different than what they've done previously in their system. So let's say we're going to probably be more of a four-man front. So with four down linemen, probably play with his hand on the ground more than he would play from up or in a spatial alignment. Now, he's kind of been back to front. He was a safety, or whatever he was, and he kind of gradually moved towards the line of scrimmage. So, again, the viewpoint of the game, it's more about spatial awareness and spatial understanding, but then when you're playing defensive end, it's really specific. It's a little bit less space, less multiples, and then you're focused on the player that's in front of you. So how we're going to attack, how we're going to teach him to play the tackle, how we're going to teach him to play the tight end. Just because he's kind of played away from the ball, off the ball in space, whether or not that helps him or not, probably not, because it's just a different game on the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, I guess the only thing where that experience helps is even if you're running a true 4-3, you're still going to have times where the defensive end drops off into coverage on zone blitzes and whatnot. So the nice thing is, I'll tell you honestly, as a guy that had to do that every now and then earlier in my career, and then every now and then as a nose tackle, but mostly when I was a defensive end, it is it's stressful when you don't know what the hell you're doing, because you get back there, you're a big clunky defensive lineman, and the first time you drop back off, even into a hook curl or out into the fire zone, like everything looks like tracer bullets. You got these little Wes Welker types running in front of you and everything, and it takes a little while to adjust to it. So it's nice to have that, and obviously Will Anderson will have that too, but it sounds like from what Nick and DeMeco have said, they really want these defensive ends, specifically Horton and Will Anderson so far, these young guys, to be able to focus on playing several techniques, just the things you have to do to be a defensive end. And I love that, because I've just seen so many times, particularly with Mario Williams when he was a rookie, you try to get a guy, no matter how physically gifted he is, no matter how smart he is, you try to get a guy in, and when he's still learn how to play in the NFL, you're heaping all this extra uncomfortable stuff on him. It's not benefiting anybody. It's not good for him. It's not good for the team. So I think this is where DeMeco and his skill as a position coach, as a former player, as a guy that really was a leader on his team, he understands this stuff. And I think he's going to have a good feel for how much each guy can handle. I don't think he's going to start right off the bat putting Will Anderson out there hoping that he goes all over the place and plays 10 different positions. I'd be surprised if he does do it. Then it's because I think he sees something special in Will Anderson in camp. Like, he's not going to plan on it. He's going to watch Will Anderson in camp and say, oh, okay, well, you know what? This guy can actually handle a lot.
Just to follow up on Jonathan's question, is there a number of undrafteds that you would like, just in terms of where your roster is? How shy of 90?
Okay, so he asked, is there a number of undrafted players you'd like to add with where your roster is?
So I think with the draft, we ended up at, call it 76, 77. So that would leave kind of a dozen-ish or so spots. So probably get 10 or 11. So maybe leave a few spots for whomever. This way, if there's an opportunity out there, whether it's now, whether it's next weekend, or whether it's throughout the course of the spring that we feel we can fit, then you leave yourself some flexibility. So I likely won't go all the way to 90 today. Again, after the draft, actually, Deo, who counted, now actually goes off. So we theoretically can have 91 players because he's one extra. So we'll probably leave ourselves a little bit of flexibility here in the event there's an opportunity to add a player that we think can help.
As far as the tracker that I was using doesn't seem to be up right now. The running back from Arizona State, Valladay, Tyler Beach, offensive lineman from Wisconsin, Jared Wayne from Pittsburgh, Darius Joyner, DB from Duke. God, they've got, I think it's pronounced Deathridge, the offensive lineman, but it looks like Death Rage. They've got some cool names in here between Tank and Juice and Dylan Death Rage, offensive lineman.
Hey Nick, when you first got here, you talked a lot about the process of getting this team back or even better than it was before. When you take a look at the talent that you added this year in the draft and last year in the draft, where would you say this team is in far as the vision that you actually have for this franchise?
So, in case you couldn't hear that, basically Sarge asked, where would you say this team is as far as the vision that you have for this franchise?
Yeah, it's not about my vision. I think it's really more about, like, where can we be as a football team? Where can we be as an organization? And are we moving forward and are we making progress? I mean, not to oversimplify it, but that's really where the focus is. So it's not about vision. It's not about what I think, where we are. Do I think we're improving the football team? I mean, hopefully. So now we have to go out there and actually play good football. So that's going to come with time. Like, this is about work. The process hasn't ended. Just because we've had 2 drafts, like, the process hasn't ended. You know, we're going to continue to move forward. So, again, just try to take advantage of our opportunities that we have every step of the way, try to put a good team together, and then get 65, 70 players in the building on the team by September, and then give ourselves an opportunity to go out there and play good football on Sunday. So anything beyond that, I mean, I think is, kind of wasting time.
I think also there's something here that's really nice to have now with DeMeco and Nick paired up, is that ideally your GM is going to have a long-term view of things. Now, Nick's very flexible, and I know he's talked about having a 5-year plan or whatever is kind of absurd because you just can't predict what's going to happen. But it's kind of nuanced. It's that you've got a long-term vision so that every move you make in the short term needs to be more concerned with, hey, is this the kind of move that if we make consistently ends up with long-term success? And then it factors into a whole lot of, probability, and is this the right thing or is this too risky to do continually? If you're doing risky stuff all the time, it's going to bite you eventually. So, like, because of that, Nick's never going to be the guy that's like, this is where we want to be right now. We're going to go out and kick ass. But I think DeMeco is, not to the fans, and DeMeco's going to be very, I guess, polite in terms of, or sportsmanlike, in terms of the way he talks in public and in press conferences and everything. But he's the hey, let's go out and win this week. Nick's going to be the guy that gives a little bit of a less inspirational speech at the press conference. But I don't think either of them, I don't need Rex Ryan. Like, I don't need to win the press conference right now. I remember when Rex Ryan got hired by the Bills and he bought a big blue truck with like a 12-inch lift and went out and season ticket sales stoked up with the Bills. I don't need that. If we had, give me Jets era, like the first couple of years of the Jets, and I would take that because it'd be fun. But that's not what I'm looking for.
You added 2 wide receivers in the draft. You get Metchie back, who's essentially a rookie. How do you feel about the wide receivers group?
Yeah, I'd say they all kind of have some different things they bring to the table, including some of the players that we signed in free agency. So a pretty diverse group. There'll be an adjustment period probably for some. And then probably do some things offensively, some of the formationing. Some guys will be better at certain things relative to others. So, again, it's really about letting the players ultimately determine how they actually all fit together and what their roles are. They all have things that they do well. They all have things they bring to the table, and then we'll try to put those in a position where we can accentuate those things. So, pretty diverse group. A lot of different, I would say, body types and different types of skills. Some fast guys, some big guys, some kind of combo guys. So, however many we end up with on the team, call it 5 or 6-ish, and then probably a few extra on the practice squad as we go. So, excited to work with the group. Probably add a guy or two here after the draft as well. So, probably end up with about a dozen. I'd say that's a position where it's kind of like offensive line. Like, you have numbers until you don't have numbers. So, inevitably, lose a receiver or two, so then you're out there in training camp with 8 or 9. So, probably it's a high volume, high numerical position just in terms of having bodies, and then kind of let the competition sort of play itself out.
In case you hadn't heard that, she said you added 2 wide receivers in the draft, plus you get Metchie back, who's essentially the rookie. How do you feel about the wide receivers? That is, as DJ Bieneme pointed out in the Chronicle, on ESPN.com yesterday or this morning, that's the wide receiver position. Despite adding to it and despite feeling really good about Tank Dell and really, really wanting John Metchie to go out and do whatever he's able to do this year, unless Nico Collins takes a huge step forward this year, and there's certain things about this offense that'll be good for Nico Collins, it still feels like there's unfinished business there, and that maybe there's either a trade or acquisition during training camp somehow.
Sorry, Nico. How's the last 3 days been spending with DeMeco Ryans?
By the way, who's WAJ? I put that up there and I didn't know. I'm thinking about too many other things right now. It's probably something stupid and simple.
It's been phenomenal.
So he said, how's it been working with DeMeco Ryans? Apologize, I was talking through that because now I don't know what WHA is. This is a good answer coming up here. So if you ever doubt whether Nick and DeMeco are going to get along,
Play itself out.
Sorry, Nico. How's the last 3 days been spending with DeMeco Ryans?
It's been phenomenal. So just can't say enough, and I think I've said it all spring, just the opportunity to work with him, just his thought process, and just the communication is constant, it's ongoing. I think we philosophically believe in a lot of same things that are important. He's been awesome. I can't say enough good things about him. So, I think he's everything that we envisioned. It's probably everything that you all saw when he was here as a player. It's probably in the same. He's very consistent each day. He has a lot of good thoughts. His input is valuable and invaluable, and just looking forward to the opportunity to continue to work with him. So as we kind of transition to sort of football, I'm sure he'll be excited to go out there. And he's very hands-on. So we've been out there. We were out there the other day in our volunteer mini camp, and he spent a lot of time on the deep.
he's doing it. He's putting his hands on us like he's talking about DeMeco. He loves Will Anderson Jr. and DeMeco. Look at that smile. Look at that smile. He's so happy to work with DeMeco. Think about him. He spent 20 years working for Bill Belichick, who probably every now and then gave him like a grunt of approval. Now obviously he has a lot more stature in the relationship than he had with Belichick, but he also has like an actual human being that he can work with.
So that's where his heart is, but has a good understanding of the overall team. Has a good understanding of the players. Let's say all the players that we drafted. He was a part of those discussions. So, can't say enough good things about just the opportunity to work with him.
Yeah, and I've told you guys all along about just how I thought these guys were going to mesh, because they excise the BS. Like there's no room or time to worry about a lot of the stuff that drag people down. Like in any organization, we've all worked for places that have good cultures and bad cultures, or bosses that worry about all the wrong stuff, or worry about the worst thing ever is a boss who cares about getting all the credit, So a guy that's, and the hardest thing in football sometimes is to find, really a bunch of driven, competitive people, but who also don't care about getting credit. And that's Caserio and DeMeco, I think. Nick, I don't think really loves being in the public eye, but he does it because that's part of his job, and neither does DeMeco. So it's just it's a good fit. It's a good fit.
Cool. Nick, you addressed this. We kind of a second ago, that you're with a few roster spots open for flexibility. Last year, when prior to the draft, you had Xavier Hutchinson to come join the team. What are some things that you look for in free agents who are potentially going to be made available? And is it coming down to production, how they feel about the unit, or is it salary, cap structure, and salary?
Okay, I'm guessing you didn't hear that. What are some things you look for in free agents who are potentially available? And does it come down to production, how they work as a unit, or is it salary, cap structure, and salary?
All those things to factor in, I would say. So fit, role, value, cost, relative to what are the other options are that we have. So I mean, the salary cap or what you have available is certainly a big part of it. Say a huge chunk of the rookie allocation will go to, Will and CJ, so that's a big part of it. So we're in a decent spot. So, I mean, just have to be pretty sound and fiscally responsible. So, I mean, we have a certain amount of cap space, but I'd like to think we're going to go out there and spend, a $10 million, player. Probably not. I don't even know who those players are that are out there, but if there's a player in a role, it's a decent cost and it kind of matches up, and we can add it to the team, we'll certainly look at it and consider it.
Speaking of guys that were out there, like Odell Beckham Jr., winner from the weekend. If we're doing winners and losers, Lamar Jackson, obvious winner. And I was way wrong on saying that. I'm conceding it now. I was way wrong on saying he needed an agent. So good job by Lamar Jackson. Unless he genuinely wanted that $220 million guaranteed or $203 million guaranteed, which I think would have been foolhardy. So it all worked out. I'll blame potentially erroneous reports the same way that people were claiming that the Texans were going to do this or do that. Let me tell you real quick on a rant. Sorry, Nick, I got to hold off for a second. I read on ESPN today talking about how it was describing what the Colts were thinking as they were sitting there at 4. And it said that the Texans had been sending out mixed signals about what they would do at number 2. And you're like, no, they were silent. Like, nobody was sending mixed signals. A bunch of people were speculating, and people started just making stuff up because, as Brooks Cabina told me the other day, we were having a conversation. Basically, in the absence of information, your brain creates something. Like, something has to exist. So as people sit and contemplate, and there's no information, the more quiet the Texans got, the more people were going to start putting stuff out there. So no, they weren't sending mixed signals. They were sending nothing at all.
We'll close with Kim and John first. You're good. All right, John.
All right, Kim, no questions. All right.
Can you give us an update on Metchie? And what are your hopes for him, knowing where he is right now?
Yeah, he's making progress, John. So he was a full participant.
So John McClain asked about John Metchie and how he's doing.
Last week when we got on the field for sort of phase 2, which is what we did. So still is he hasn't played football in a long time. So kind of going from phase 2 and then really phase 3 when we actually start practicing football and some of the football, I would say, movements that are involved, space, defense, not that we're going to have contact. So nobody's worked harder over the last however many months to get himself to this point. So I wouldn't say anybody is surprised that he's arrived at this point. I'd say his will to work, his effort, his mental and physical toughness, and the work with the sports performance staff has been incredible. So there's a lot of people that deserve a lot of credit that have helped him to get to this point. It has to start with John. So I don't want to say it's kind of inspiring, but to see somebody do that. But he's making progress. He's in a good spot. Haven't been any setbacks, but, still a long road ahead of us, and he hasn't played a lot of football, but we're all certainly cautiously optimistic about where he's headed.
And one thing about that is I've always said, like, I don't want to get too eager for John Metchie to play because it feels like it's a disservice to the kid who's trying to obviously, first and foremost, take care of beating cancer. And when you go back to David Quesenberry completed treatment and came back to the team, but then remember, gosh, was that the Hard Knocks? Yeah, that was the Hard Knocks episode when O'Brien, and probably one of the better, I'm going to get all teary up about Bill O'Brien. How about that? When O'Brien told Quesenberry that it wasn't going to be that year. And think about that, how long ago that was now. We're going on almost a decade. And then when Quesenberry did come back and was in camp, I can remember talking to a defensive coach who hadn't been with the Texans. He was relatively new as Quesenberry was coming back, and he was like, very politely saying, I just, I don't see it with him. Doesn't seem like he has the strength to do it. And that was a considerable amount of time, maybe 2 years after the cancer treatment. And now, Quesenberry's been a starting offensive tackle these last few years in the league. So everybody's going to be different. Some people have come back from this very, very quickly. Some people haven't. But when it comes to Metchie, it's going to be his own journey, and I'm trying not to pencil him in as a guy that's going to compete or anything unless it's really, really time.
Last one, you mentioned last night you had a good relationship with Monty. Today, 3 trades with the Eagles. Obviously, you came to Houston with a lot of relationships, but in the 3 years you've been a general manager, how have you seen, learned about relationships with other people and getting on the phone?
Yeah.
So he just said, you mentioned your relationship with Monty. He's talking about Monty Ossenfort, the general manager of the Cardinals. And this is where, on the thumbnail, I think I said, we're open for business 24/7. That's where it comes. And this is interesting because obviously the trade was with Arizona to trade the number 3, trade up to 3. Today, 3 trades with the Eagles. Obviously, you came to Houston with relationships, but in the 3 years that you've been general manager, what have you learned about relationships with other people and getting on the phone? I've got a couple of videos to play after this press conference is over.
That's a good question, Brooks. I think you try to have an understanding philosophically about different organizational philosophies, a propensity to maybe move or consider a trade. I would say when you look at the trade, so we made a trade with Philly, and then Philly made the trade with Detroit as well for, a 2050 4th-round pick or whatever it was for Swift. But some teams are, I would say, more willing to move and to be creative than others, and that's okay. It just depends whatever your philosophy, whatever floats your boat. So, and I think it's probably a two-way street. I think anybody that looks at our organization knows that we're literally open for business, probably 24/7. So if there's a trade or something to consider, they're going to pick the phone up and call it because we're going to at least think about it. So I'd say that's probably the biggest thing. Just have an understanding of kind of who's willing to move. What's their propensity to move? How often have they done it? Are they less inclined? We actually look at this and study this before the draft. So we kind of do an overview of the decision makers in each organization. We kind of look at their trade history, their draft history, some of the things that they've done, maybe some of the trades that we've executed with them. We even go back to my time in New England, dealing with certain teams. You kind of know who are those teams, and you kind of know some other teams are like they literally won't move or pick up the phone. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It just means that's what they believe in philosophically. So
I'm not buying it. That's a shot at Brian Gaine.
It kind of gives you an opportunity to, be creative in different situations. And if it makes sense, you do it. If it doesn't, then you kind of keep it moving.
So as far as that goes, the one thing that made me excited about that, and obviously Nick's very, very active. There were more trades this year than any other trade ever, in what was the most viewed trade ever as well this year for the NFL draft. 43 trades. And trades drive a lot. People get excited about trades and are eager to watch and see what's going on. Even draft day trades where it's on this third day, you're not even nobody knows most of the names that you're talking about when it comes to trading. But the thing that intrigues me about it is, for better or for worse, depending on how you feel about this guy whose team is currently in the playoffs, but Daryl Morey, the reason that Daryl Morey was able to pull off the Harden trade wasn't because he was a brilliant architect of the trade or anything. It was that he was there when the trade was available, because he's always working the phones. And that's why it drove me insane when O'Brien acted like being the general manager was no big deal, because you're just watching film, you take a call and then go back and watch and felt man, there's a lot. It's not like most good GMs work 60 to 80 hours a week on average. But anybody else could do it part-time. It means it's a lot. It's a lot. So I like that. Yeah. Let's see. Was Nick 10% of all trades? He was 8 out of 43. So whatever that works out to. It's about 25, 8 times 5 is 8 is 40, 17%. Somebody do the math for me there. Let's see. I was really happy that the Texans got down and dirty in the PR propaganda psyop game. They had a sneaky strategy. Let's see. Let's hope we see it on the field. I wouldn't doubt if they leaked CJ's PS2 scores. That's, you know what? If we're gonna go down this road, Bubba homeschool, I'm gonna say that was the Colts. I think like Mr. Loose Lips, Mr. Tasteless jokes about Will Levis, Jim Irsay. I think it was, and not even those scouts and executives that talk to Bob McGinn. You can tell a lot of them are old guys. Like, no offense, old. Like, I mean, like my age and older guys that have been in the NFL a long time. So I think it was the Colts trying to get the Texans to let CJ Stroud slide. That's what I'm going to go with until proven otherwise. Just because now I am in extreme CJ Stroud fan / defense mode. And I'm going to tell you another thing here. I'm going to play this because this is Peter King. Let's see. Here we go. We'll go with this. Okay, first, that's how I started this video off. This is James Harden. This is James Harden before his game last night when he scored over 40 points. Had some brilliant passes, which I get. That makes me annoyed just because now, whether it's with Brooklyn or with Philadelphia, whenever James Harden has a nice pass, people act like he had never made a beautiful between the legs entry pass or anything before. It's just a lot of times in Houston. Sometimes it was wasted on Omer Asik, but this is going to be Peter King talking about that S2 cognition test that CJ had such a horrible score on, and that was supposed to be the death knell to any chance that CJ Stroud had.
I've just gotten really sour on the whole S2 thing because.
And Peter, by the way, spoke with CJ Stroud after that awesome press conference that he and Will Anderson and DeMeco Ryans and Nick Caserio did on Friday last week.
This is a test that nobody heard of 2 months ago. Nobody,
right,
other than people in the league. It's 8 years old. It's this cognitive test that is supposed to measure how well you process, how quickly you process information. So for a quarterback, you come back from, you get the snap from center and you look in the secondary to try to make decisions. And this test really started to get some attention last year because the highest scoring quarterback on the test in 2022 coming into the draft was Brock Purdy. So Brock Purdy was the last player picked in the draft, and he comes in and he plays so well in the 8 games he plays for the 49ers that they said, hey, you're our starter. So I think that was really sort of an interesting introduction of the S2 test and blah, blah, blah. But I just think it's gotten out of control a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you cannot succeed in the NFL unless you score well on this test. But anybody who watched
when he says that, he's not saying himself. He's saying that's what the narrative out there is, or that's what they're trying to sell you, is that you can't succeed in the NFL. Oh, if you don't score well, you can't succeed in the NFL. That's what the people, and all the damn information we're actually getting out of this isn't from teams. We're getting basically the founder of I played him on my channel, and he gave some good information, kind of trying to back down a lot of the vitriol coming out about Stroud. But it's also that we're getting the information from the people selling the test.
The Georgia game in the college playoffs, anybody would say that if you say that this guy, CJ Stroud, can't process information or whatever, I'd call you crazy.
And I think that's where I think that's where the Texans were, and I think that as I've been saying, like any of these things, whatever test it is, it's a 40, a bench press, a Wonderlic score, which they don't use anymore, an S2 cognition test. It's one data point, and like all those stats, you're always backing up against what you see on film. And if people value that S2 cognition test, then they're gonna go and they're gonna look and say, okay, well, what are the reasons that he might have scored low, and is what we're seeing from this S2 cognition test backed up by what we see on film? It gets dangerous because sometimes there's either like a halo effect, but sometimes there's also the anti-halo effect where you see that a guy's got a slow 40 and then you refuse to acknowledge that he's fast on film. Or likewise, you see that a guy's really got a really fast 40 and you just assume he's faster than he is. So you always you got to balance everything and take the human subjective side and balance in it with the objective side. And I think in football, especially, and analytics people will tell you this, it's the sport that's hardest to remove the human element from, because there's so many different variables all the time. And scheme matters so much, and trust in your teammate matters so much, just way more than it does in baseball. And I think that, like what Peter King said, and then what various Ohio State people have said whenever I've said anything about CJ Stroud, if I put CJ Stroud in the description, the Ohio State people come, because they're very loyal to him. But the people at Ohio State, a lot of them, will just swear by him and how good he did, and thought he was getting railroaded by this S2 cognition test. So now that CJ Stroud is the Texans quarterback, 100%, I am against the cognidiots, the S2 cognidiots, big cognition, as Sean calls them, the other C word, whatever it is. We're gonna rail against this and try to discredit the entire damn thing. So Peter King then read a quote from CJ Stroud that he had put. I was going to read it myself, but then I saw that Peter King had done it on his Peter King podcast. So this is what CJ Stroud told him at NRG Stadium after the press conference last week. I know my film speaks for itself. I think I've been one of the most consistent players in college football for the last 2 years. If you turn on the tape, you can answer the questions. But those who don't understand tape might want to go to other things and analyze other things. They're more than welcome to do such. But the people who are making the choices and the picks, they know what I can do. They understood the IQ that I do have. And he said, a lot of people haven't played the sport, and critics are going to critique. Yeah, I always try to stay away from the people who haven't played the sport, just because I'm in an industry where the worst thing an ex-athlete can do to try to prove his point is say, you don't know because you didn't play. Because okay, that's the only reason I'm talking into a microphone and I have a little bit of I've got a big extra leg up compared to people who didn't play the sport, is that I'm supposed to be able to use words to explain what I know, instead of just saying you don't know because you didn't play the game. But as far as what CJ is saying, I'm criticizing athletes in the media, not athletes themselves, or ex-athletes in the media. So as far as CJ, the athlete right now, I think it is fair to say there are people in the NFL, or people who, did play the sport and are in the NFL, who maybe value the S2 cognition test a lot more. I think some of those quotes really did some of those anonymous quotes felt like somebody that might just really be trying to get CJ Stroud to slide, that's the dirty business of football that you would be. Think about that. You're trying to get a guy to slide. You're taking money out of his pocket, so he can come to you, where you will then tell him how much you love him, but never, ever, ever disclose that you were part of the reason that he slid. I guess probably the moral bargaining you do there is say well, look, we're a better team. Texans are at number 2. It's not going to be as good a situation as, I don't know, whatever hypothetically Irsay or somebody might feel like, because he got to 4. Sorry. As far as nobody talking about the S2 scores until this year, the fishiness of it is that they tried real hard to keep it quiet. The first I heard of it, I know they had talked about Justin Fields, some kind of mental test. The articles I found from 2 years ago didn't speak specifically about the S2 cognition test. I assumed this is what they were talking about when they said that Justin Fields had a very high score at the time a couple of years ago, and it's been revealed that he did have a very high S2 cognition test. But the fact that this was the year that all of a sudden these S2 cognition scores leaked, and I think part of it, Sean Pendergast made a good point that, for Bryce Young, it would be really smart for Bryce Young's agent to have leaked those scores, because Bryce Young scored really well. And if the thing that's supposed to help him overcome his height is that he's got a freakishly high football IQ, then yeah, I would want that out there too. I would want everything that could make the Panthers feel as comfortable, all that stuff leaking into their subconscious, because they'll all tell you they don't read the news and they don't hear the reports or anything, but every little bit of that subliminal messaging that seeps into their brains and makes them feel good and squishy and warm about drafting Bryce Young matters. So I think that was probably smart. I would hope that somebody that works for Bryce Young and his agent, and I know that he works with David Mulligetta, but only for the marketing side, not for the contract side. I would hope it wasn't his own people that did that, because it seems like Bryce Young and CJ Stroud are actually buds. So yeah, it was kind of weird. It was weird. This is the NFL Live, folks, and I gotta say, I think Marcus Spears definitely watches the Texans. I don't know why. I think we might try to have him on the show, the morning show, just to find out exactly why he's talking to watches the Texans, other than he's from Louisiana, and maybe he was a Texans fan when he was a teenager or something. Let me get this one off of here. But I believe we started off with Marcus Spears on this one, talking about CJ Stroud.
I love the fit, babyface, and for two reasons. I think C.J. Stroud is a very cerebral quarterback, understands coverages, sees the field very well, but it's because of 25 starts in college. And the most important thing you have to do as a rookie coming into the league is value the football. Over his 25 starts, it was 85 touchdowns and only 12 interceptions. I think they hit a home run with C.J. Stroud. I think they have a calm quarterback that has a lot of poise, and is probably as pure of a pocket passer as we've seen come out when we don't talk about athleticism as well as pocket passing and the ability to maneuver in the pocket.
It is. It's gotten to the point where it's almost. We've talked about this a lot. He's saying you don't see a pure pocket passer. I mean, think about the top 4 quarterbacks this year. It really goes to show, and this is Mina Kimes makes a good point about this in a little bit. How little they really value a guy being a polished pocket passer anymore. It's not that they don't value it. I think the NFL has kind of conceded that you're drafting guys who have 1 or 2 years of experience. It's not going to be like, hey, he was a 4-year starter at Tennessee. And he's got the other thing about that too is a leader and as somebody that's got all that starting experience as a quarterback for 4 years. Just the actual mechanics of running a practice and everything. There's a different level of maturity you get by getting all those reps, but also between the college game being what it is and these guys only having a year or 2 of experience, like with Anthony Richardson, those two, Levis and Richardson, have a lot of work to do on some of those things. Bryce Young, he's just a conundrum in that, like, okay, how much are they going to want to try to get him out of the pocket? He's great within the pocket, but CJ Stroud is a guy who has had the opportunity, and this is where in the evaluation process, sometimes it's a negative for the prospect because when he's on a good team like Ohio State, he doesn't have as many opportunities to show what he can do. He does it, and CJ Stroud has made every throw and he's thrown into tight windows. He's done that, but he doesn't have as many opportunities to show it. But because of that, he also has had a lot of time to sit and learn how to actually genuinely be a good pocket quarterback. And like it's harder to find these days. And in that respect, I think he might be way better prepared than some of these other guys. So even though it theoretically maybe hurt him that he went to such a good school in comparison to Bryce Young, because he didn't have the opportunity to show as often what he could do under duress or what he could do when he had to run. He certainly showed that he could do it. He just didn't have as many opportunities to do it. It does lead him to perhaps be that much more polished as a guy that's willing to stand in the pocket and do these things. This is Orlovsky talking about Stroud and whether he'd be ready to start in the first year or week 1. I edited, cut out a few things here, but I didn't do Orlovsky dirty at all. It's all the same message.
I would play all 3 of them from snap number.
They were asking about would they start these guys week 1.
One, I think it's kind of twofold. 1, the individual player, then 2, the people that they're with. CJ Stroud, you have a very good understanding that he's going to know your playbook. If you look at CJ Stroud, they just had in San Francisco, Bobby Slowick, his offensive coordinator, just had Brock Purdy, a rookie.
Yeah. Now, as far as that goes, okay, I love Brock Purdy. I like everything he did. I think Brock Purdy, another guy that was way more mobile, I think, than people realized or wanted to give him credit for. And I think that it is always really important to point out, though, too, that he had Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, a really good offensive line, and which is fair. I don't think that people are really expecting the Texans to all of a sudden be playing like the 49ers. And as such, they shouldn't expect CJ Stroud to all of a sudden be playing like Brock Purdy was able to on that team, where at times they really had a lot of run after the catch that helped out. The other thing that helped Brock Purdy out was that he was in a similar scheme in college, and a lot of the concepts, and I believe the verbiage, I think Sage Rosenfels was talking about this, was very, very similar. So there is that leg up. I think that if you look at other veteran quarterbacks who have started to play in Kubshanistan, Matt Ryan, the first year it wasn't that great. Second year he's MVP. Aaron Rodgers, first year they won a lot of games, but the offense wasn't really clicking. Second year under Matt LaFleur, MVP. So even with veteran players, it can take a little while to really get all the reps and nuances down because it's a reps based offense. I remember talking to Kubiak about this when I was trying to when Kubiak came to coach the Texans. I was really excited because as a defensive player, I'd gone against his defenses or offenses and it sucked. And I was just always so intrigued by the way they went about their business. So, I kind of tried to pick his brain a little bit about everything. And the one consistent message is it's reps, reps, reps. You gotta make everything look the same. You got to make the run blocking look like the pass blocking. You got to make the handoff look like the fake and all those things. And it just takes time to really get it going. I think perhaps underrated side to CJ Stroud when it comes to running this offense is that, okay, and this is where we'll get, let's get down to the nitty gritty. I think people were getting to the point where they're just talking about like Bryce Young, like he had hung the moon and there wasn't a single area that was better with CJ Stroud other than CJ's height. And that's just false. If you look at some of like the heat charts and success rates and grades on throws to specific areas in the field, CJ was better at throwing NFL outs, driving the ball 15 yards to the numbers on the sideline. Like CJ's got a stronger arm and more drive for that. So I think there's that. The other thing though, too, is that CJ is much more precise, not just in his accuracy throwing the ball, but in his footwork, in his mechanics, all those things. And you don't get that without an extreme attention to detail. So look, it's not like Bryce Young is bad at those things, but because of the way Bryce Young plays, there are times where he's not as crisp. He's not as methodical in a good way. Sometimes people will talk about CJ Stroud and say methodical, but they'll say it in a bad way. Like they mean like he's too slow in plotting. And I can see that. I get that criticism. But when it comes to being precise and being very on point with the timing of his steps and the rhythm of his reads, I think that CJ is going to adapt very well to this Bobby Slowick offense. And now we just got to find out if Bobby Slowick's the guy. This is, I believe, Mina Kimes.
These guys are walking in like David Carr did to Houston so many years ago. Totally. I also think, more broadly...
Oh, thank you, Mina, for bringing David Carr up. And I apologize for stopping you on that facial expression. But you don't look sad or anything. But I think that I'm really glad Mina brought up David Carr because I lived through that. And I should have brought it up before. Like CJ stepping into this situation where you've got two either however you want to call Titus Howard, but two solid offensive tackles. Larry Tunsil's very, very, very good. A guard in Kenyon Green, hopefully that's going to come along this year. I trust that he'll be better. I trust that he'll stay healthier. That's what I really hope. You've got a starting caliber right guard, and hopefully you're going to have an upgraded center. That's so much different than what David Carr had. David Carr had 6 rookies starting week 1. And not to mention a lot of the veterans on that, other than Steve McKinney and Corey Bradford and a couple of the other guys that I'm forgetting right now, but they had a lot of guys that were journeymen. So like David Carr stepped in as a quarterback and just got his ass beat and didn't really have anybody around to show him the right way to do things. So he's definitely not in that situation. I would like to add at least one more receiving weapon, but Dalton Schultz. Okay. Like I love Billy Miller, and Billy Miller did really well in the first year of the Texans, but Billy Miller was not as productive or as proven a tight end as Dalton Schultz, and Dalton Schultz, one of the reasons that he was as productive as he was in Dallas was that he was a security blanket for Dak Prescott. And somehow along the way, Dalton Schultz went from being a guy that people really respected as a potential good signing to a competitor, to a competitive team in free agency. When Dalton Schultz signs with the Texans, all of a sudden I was like, oh, well, he's actually a product of the system. The offensive coordinator got fired last year. Like, how beautiful was that system that the offensive coordinator is gone and you got Mike McCarthy back calling plays? The fact that Dalton Schultz was a security blanket for Dak Prescott makes me feel a lot better about some of the options that CJ Stroud's going to have. So I feel good about that part of it. trying to denigrate Dalton Schultz. So, Mina, good point on David Carr.
The NFL is better at designing offenses for young quarterbacks straight out of college than it was even 5-10 years in
100%.
the past. For so.
And I think when you look at Dan Orlovsky emphatically nodding his head there, I think it's very, very true in terms of, like, NFL coaches almost used to put the NFL offense on a pedestal, to the point where they might borrow a little bit from college guys, but they got to the point where everybody was basically running the same offense. Like, run and shoot had its run for a little while, and then we all started going, pro style with a fullback and a tailback, and all that shotgun some of the time, but certainly not this fancy stuff they're doing in college. And that all changed in a lot of ways, partly because of Chip Kelly, partly because of other people, really the Patriots at times going gun all the time because Belichick wasn't afraid to steal from college, but they're running a lot of concepts and doing a lot of things in the zone read, so Colin Kaepernick coming in and running the zone, the pistol, Russell Wilson and Andy Luck and those guys doing things that other people hadn't done before. RG3, obviously, everything started changing really with RG3, Colin Kaepernick, all those guys. In the pistol, which was invented at Las Vegas. When Colin Kaepernick got here, they taught that to Greg Roman, who was in San Francisco. Like, Greg Roman learned the pistol formation and everything you could do off of it from I'm blanking on his name, the Las Vegas coach there. So yeah, that's that part of it would lead you to believe that I think there's very, very little chance that CJ Stroud isn't starting by week 4, and I'll be surprised if he's not starting week 1. There's too few reps to go around anymore. Emmanuel Acho, excuse me. I sometimes am harsh on Emmanuel Acho, so I want to be sure that I also show when he is positive on the Texans. He was the one that was very skeptical of DeMeco Ryans choosing to come to the Texans.
Number 3.
He ranked the Texans the number 3 best draft.
Winning the offseason. The Houston Texans. If you got a new head coach and you got a new quarterback, you're already in the running. But it's not just the coach and the quarterback that they got. They got Stroud, they got DeMeco Ryans, but they got Will Anderson. Will Anderson is good to give you 8 to 12 sacks a season for the next 8 to 12 seasons. So Will Anderson plus CJ Stroud plus DeMeco Ryans, they put them at my 3 winner of the offseason.
Yay! We're in Emmanuel Acho number 3. Okay, and then we'll go to Kurt Warner in a second. As far as crap, I'm on with the Clinton the show right now. I'm gonna go in there right this moment. Goodbye, everybody. I'll resume this after I'm done with Clinton's show.